Welcome back. Today, we're diving deep into an idea that, well, it's often misunderstood. Communism.
Hmm.
When you hear that word, you probably think Karl Marx, maybe 20th century politics.
Right, that's the immediate connection for most people.
But the truth is, these core concepts, living communally, sharing resources, this whole idea of a society without private property or class divisions, it actually goes way, way back.
Yeah, what's really fascinating is tracing how these ideas, about collective well-being, economic equality, they just keep popping up.
Across different cultures, different times.
Exactly. Sometimes it was just practical for survival. Other times a deep philosophical thing, long before modern political theories were even a thought.
So our mission today is to kind of unpack that history, those philosophical roots.
We want to trace that thread, this human desire maybe, or just ingenuity.
Show you how different people, different societies wrestled with inequality, with wealth.
And how that kind of laid the groundwork, the ethical soil for what came later.
Okay, let's start that journey then. Maybe with what some people call primitive communism.
You're thinking hunter-gatherer societies.
Yeah, exactly. Where just surviving day to day meant cooperation, sharing food, shelter.
Right. There weren't really formal class divisions because everyone was, well, interdependent.
It wasn't an ideology back then.
No, not at all. It's just how life worked. And you see echoes of that in early farming villages, too.
Shared land cultivation.
Often, yes. Working fields together, distributing the harvest based on need. Again, very pragmatic. Community survival often trumped individual ownership, especially for the essentials.
Okay, but then things get more philosophical, right? Even ancient thinkers touched on this.
They did. Plato's Republic is a big one people point to.
Right, but his vision, it was kind of elitist, wasn't it? The guardian class living communally?
It absolutely was elitist, yeah. Not universal equality. But what's interesting is his reason. He was worried about wealth corrupting power.
Ah, okay. So the communal living for guardians was to keep them focused on the common good.
Precisely. Keep personal gain out of the equation for the leaders. And then completely differently, you have early Christianity.
The Acts of the Apostles, holding property in common.
Exactly. Distributing it as anyone had need. That wasn't just like charity. It was embedding economic equality right into their moral and spiritual life.
Yeah.
A shared existence.
And you mentioned other schools. Stoicism.
Yeah, Stoicism, cynicism. They also pushed for detachment from material wealth. More for individual virtue, maybe, than society-wide change, but still questioning the value of possessions.
So these ideas, these seeds, they were there. How did they survive into, say, the Middle Ages with its very strict social layers?
Well, they didn't just survive, they kind of burst out again,
Well,
often in radical religious movements.
right, okay. You fast forward a bit. 17th century England, the Diggers.
The Diggers, yes, such a fascinating example. They weren't just protesting, they were acting, cultivating common land.
Based on this idea that creation was for everyone, not private owners.
That was their core belief, a real practical challenge to land ownership itself, rooted in a kind of radical religious justice.
And these movements, peasant revolts too, they often faced brutal repression.
Oh, absolutely, from the church, from the state. But it shows this persistent desire, doesn't it, for a fairer, more communal way of life. It wasn't just about money, it was a moral vision.
Which leads us towards the Enlightenment and the figures often called utopian socialists.
Right, a really key bridge. People like Thomas More.
Utopia 1516, an island with no private property, no money, shared work.
Yeah, the name itself, No Place, tells you how idealistic it was.
But it wasn't all just books, was it? There were actual attempts.
There were. Robert Owen's communities, like New Lanark, Charles Fourier's Salansteries.
What were those exactly? Just shared houses?
Oh, much more. They were attempts at whole cooperative societies, trying to make work enjoyable, rotating jobs, harmonizing individual desires with the group.
But their approach was different from later communists.
Very much so. They sharply criticized capitalism as it was emerging, but they generally believed in peaceful reform. Setting up these model communities, they weren't typically calling for revolution.
Okay, so wrapping this part up, what's the big takeaway here for you, listening?
Well, you see this recurring theme, don't you? From ancient survival tactics.
To philosophers questioning wealth.
To these religious groups demanding justice, and then the utopian dreamers.
This idea of a society that's maybe free from exploitation, free from private greed, it wasn't invented recently. It's been a constant thread.
Which really makes you think, doesn't it? If this longing for fairness, for community, for shared resources. If it predates any single political label like communism,
What does that suggest? About us, about human nature.
and about our ongoing search for that balance,
Yeah.
between the individual and the community.
It shows that Karl Marx, well, he didn't pull the idea out of thin air. He took this very old, often moral vision.
And gave it a new framework, a sharp critique of capitalism, and a powerful revolutionary energy.
Definitely something to think about. Join us next time as we continue our deep dive.